Welcome to Shadow of Truth. The tragic murder of James Berry, a love gone wrong and the shocking truth behind his death. The night that changed everything. Before we dive into the chilling details of tonight's case, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more true crime stories. Don't forget to tap the notification bell so you never miss a chilling update. Now let's get into it. On a cold November night in 2016, Loxahatchee, Florida became the setting for a chilling real-life nightmare. At just before 1 a.m., a frantic 911 call shattered the stillness of the night. The call was placed by 56-year-old Nicola Berry, a mother whose voice trembled with desperation. The words that escaped her lips painted a scene of utter horror. Her son, 21-year-old James Berry, had been found, severely injured in his bedroom. The frantic mother reported hearing screams, only to discover her son's lifeless body. It was a moment that no parent should ever endure. She and the others in the house had done everything they could to help him. Her live-in boyfriend, Guy Hand, had desperately performed CPR, but it was clear James was beyond saving. By the time the paramedics arrived, it was too late. James Berry was declared dead at the scene. The injuries, including fatal stab wounds to his chest, were unmistakable. In the early moments of the investigation, a sense of disbelief hung in the air. 3 people remained in the home when law enforcement arrived. Nicola, her boyfriend Guy, and James's best friend, Jeff Jarspakowski, who had stayed over for the night. They were all visibly shaken, with bloodstains marking their hands and arms from the life-saving efforts they had attempted on James. Outside, under the dim lights of emergency vehicles, the small group waited as detectives arrived. Inside the house, detectives discovered a gruesome scene on the K8. On the kitchen counter, a bloodied carving knife, its white handle and 10-inch curved blade, stood out, ominous and damning. It was later determined that the knife had come from Guy's personal collection. A butcher by trade, Guy kept several knives in the home, including the very one used to stab James. However, the presence of the knife left many questions unanswered. Why was it in the kitchen if the attack had occurred in the bedroom? How had the weapon been used? As investigators moved through the house, a trail of blood led them down the hallway and toward the bedroom, where James's body had been discovered. It was evident that the attack had been chaotic, and the victims were in shock. The house, which had been locked up tight before bed, now stood as the scene of an unfathomable act of violence. Yet, amidst the confusion and the bloodshed, one question arose: who had done this? Theories began to surface almost immediately. Guy Hand was one of the first to suggest that an intruder must have entered the house. He speculated that James's girlfriend, 19-year-old Melanie M., was somehow responsible for the crime. But the idea that Melanie, someone familiar with the home, could have made her way inside, committed the murder, and then escaped without a trace was a mystery in itself. According to Guy, James and Melanie had been in an argument earlier that night. James had been trying to break up with her, and shortly before the murder, he had sent her a message to make it clear that their relationship was over. Jeff Jarspakowski, James's best friend, corroborated Guy's claims, stating that James had messaged Melanie earlier in the evening, warning her to leave. But there was one major problem. The doors to the house were all locked, and there was no sign of forced entry. The front door was locked, as was the side door that connected to the patio. So, how had Melanie got inside? Had she somehow stolen a key? Or was there another way into the house that no one had considered? The back door, which had been left ajar, seemed to provide a possible answer. But how had it been opened? Guy speculated that perhaps Melanie had broken in through the garage, but that didn't explain everything. If she had used a key to enter, why would she have left it behind? Was she too careless, or was something else at play? As law enforcement began to piece together the events of the night, they discovered even more troubling evidence. A bloodied cell phone was found near the back door, its pink case unmistakable. It belonged to Melanie. But what did this mean? Was it just a coincidence, or was it a sign of her involvement? The hours after the murder became a blur of confusion and conflicting accounts. Guy and Jeff remained insistent that Melanie must have returned to the house after leaving earlier that evening. But as the investigation unfolded, the possibility of a different explanation began to surface. Could it be that Guy Hand, the man who had tried so desperately to revive James, had been more involved in the crime than he let on? Why was he so eager to accuse Melanie, someone who was already devastated by the breakup? Had he been hiding something? As more evidence came to light and theories began to form, the case took unexpected and dark turns. What appeared to be a tragic love triangle might not be as simple as it seemed. The truth, hidden beneath layers of secrets, betrayal, and a violent act, was about to reveal itself in ways no one could predict. The secrets begin to unravel. The discovery of the bloodied cell phone sent a chill through the investigation. It was a piece of evidence that could either confirm the suspicion of Melanie's involvement in James's death or provide a twist in an already complicated case. Investigators worked quick to trace Melanie's movements that night, and what they found only added more confusion to the growing mystery. The night James was murdered, Melanie had been at home with her parents. When asked about her whereabouts, her parents seemed genuinely surprised that the police were even looking for her. They hadn't seen any signs that she had been involved in the tragedy. As far as they knew, their daughter was simply at home, unaware of the horrifying events unfolding at James's house. But the investigation wasn't about to let her go. Police quickly found footage of her car, an older model Toyota Corolla, caught on traffic cameras near James's home at roughly 12:30 a.m. The evidence was damning. Melanie had been there, and it was clear that she had been near the scene of the crime. What was she doing there in the middle of the night, hours after she had been told to leave? Detectives began to put together the timeline of events that night. James had sent Melanie a final message shortly before midnight, telling her their relationship was over. The argument between them had escalated. But what happened after he asked her to leave? Did Melanie return to his house, driven by jealousy, anger, or a broken heart? Or was there someone else who had followed her? A new theory began to form. Law enforcement decided to check nearby areas where Melanie's car could have been seen. It wasn't long before they tracked her vehicle to a small town in Maryland. It seemed like an odd place to flee to, but as they learned, Melanie had family there. Police were dispatched to the area, hoping to find her and piece together the missing parts of the story. When they arrived at her uncle's house, they found her car parked out front. Officers knocked on the door, unsure of what they would find. Melanie answered the door with a calm expression, almost as if she had been expecting them. It was a straw. It was a strange reaction considering the severity of the crime she was being investigated for. Detectives asked her a few simple questions, just to ensure she was all right emotionally, but Melanie seemed distant. She wasn't acting like someone who had just lost her ex-boyfriend in such a violent manner. Instead, her response to everything was unsettlingly calm. "I don't know what's going on," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just scared." The officers, unsure whether to trust her demeanor, decided to speak with her privately. They made it clear that she was not under arrest, only being questioned as a part of their investigation. Melanie agreed to sit down with the detectives, though there was a sense that she knew more than she was letting on. As the questioning continued, the cracks in Melanie's story began to show. She claimed she had gone to James's house to speak with him, to try to fix their relationship. But what happened after that? Why had she been so insistent that she had not caused harm? When asked about the attack, she seemed confused. She claimed she didn't know how badly James had been hurt. She didn't mean to kill him, she insisted. "I thought he'd be okay," she said, her eyes drifting as if trying to convince herself as much as the detectives. "I didn't think it would be that bad." The details she provided during the interrogation seemed rehearsed and half-formed, as if she wasn't sure what part of her story to stick to. She mentioned grabbing a knife from the kitchen, but how had she even gotten in? How had she been able to take a weapon without anyone hearing? The more questions detectives asked, the more Melanie's responses seemed to shift, as if she were trying to piece together a narrative that would save her. One of the most striking admissions came when she revealed that she had tossed the knife away after fleeing the scene. TE was a carving knife that had been used earlier that evening to prepare a meal. Yet Melanie seemed to show little understanding of the significance of the weapon she had left behind. It wasn't just her story that raised suspicion. It was her actions too. After the murder, Melanie had immediately left the scene and driven to Maryland. Along the way, she had stopped at a Walmart to buy a new cell phone. She had known enough not to return to the scene of the crime and retrieve the phone she had left behind. Why had she been so careful to erase any evidence? Meanwhile, investigators back in Florida were piecing together the evidence from the scene. The bloodied carving knife, the open back door, and the mysterious presence of Melanie's phone led them to believe that something far darker than a simple breakup was at play. The idea that Melanie had merely gone to confront James seemed increasingly unlikely. Had she been planning this all along? Or had something snapped when James rejected her for the last time? As the investigation deepened, another crucial piece of evidence came into play: the blood on Melanie's shirt. Testing confirmed that the blood on her sleeve matched James's blood type. But there was something else. Melanie's presence at the scene, coupled with the damning evidence of the knife and her own confession, painted a portrait of someone who had been involved, perhaps more directly than she was willing to admit. At this point, the investigation seemed to be narrowing in on Melanie, but questions still lingered. Was she the sole perpetrator, or was there someone else involved? Theories swirled that Guy Hand, who had been so quick to accuse Melanie, might be hiding something. After all, his own knife had been used in the crime. Was Guy truly the hero he appeared to be, or had he staged the crime to protect himself? In the coming weeks, investigators would begin to dig deeper into the relationships and secrets that surrounded the tragic events of November 16th. The truth was becoming clearer, but the shadows of doubt remained. Melanie's defense team would go to great lengths to discredit the evidence, but no matter what they argued, one fact remained undeniable. James Barry was dead, and someone had to answer for it: the verdict and aftermath. The trial for the murder of James Barry was a tense and emotional affair, drawing attention not just because of the gruesome nature of the crime, but because of the complex web of emotions, manipulation, and deceit that surrounded it. As the court proceedings unfolded, it became clear that both the prosecution and defense had their work cut out for them. At the heart of it all was Melanie M., the ex-girlfriend accused of murdering her former lover James in a violent and senseless act. The prosecution's case was straightforward. They believed Melanie had gone to James's house on that fateful night with the intent to confront him over their troubled relationship. When she was told it was over for good, they argued something inside her snapped. In an act of passion and anger, she had taken the carving knife from the kitchen and stabbed James. The fact that she had confessed to the crime, albeit in a confused and shifting manner, was a key piece of evidence for the prosecution. But Melanie's defense team was determined to fight back. They focused on one central argument: that Melanie was not the murderer, but rather a frightened and confused witness who had run from the scene after seeing someone else kill James. They pointed the finger at Guy Hand, Nicola's boyfriend, and the one person who had been closest to the victim that night. The defense suggested that Guy, in a moment of rage, had attacked James, and Melanie had been too terrified to do anything but run. The defense argued that the prosecution's case against Melanie was flawed and based on assumptions. They highlighted the strange behavior of Guy Hand, who had acted suspiciously in the aftermath of the murder. They pointed out that he had moved the murder weapon, a bloody knife, from the scene and placed it in the kitchen, seemingly without any reason other than to cover his tracks. They also noted that Guy had failed to perform CPR correctly, an important detail that suggested he was not the heroic figure he portrayed himself to be. But the prosecution wasn't buying it. They argued that despite the circumstantial evidence, it was clear that Melanie was the one who had committed the murder. Her confession, though disjointed and inconsistent, still placed her at the scene of the crime. The fact that she had been the one to grab the knife, stab James, and then leave him to die while fleeing the scene was enough to seal her fate in their eyes. In the courtroom, Melanie sat quietly, her face stoic as the testimonies unfolded. She did not take the stand to testify in her defense, choosing instead to remain silent. This was a decision that would later be scrutinized, as her refusal to explain her actions in her own words left the jury to interpret the events based solely on the evidence presented. As the days of the trial wore on, it became clear that the case had become more than just about who killed James Barry. It had become a battle of narratives, with each side fighting for control of the story. The prosecution painted Melanie as a jealous ex-girlfriend driven by rage, while the defense tried to cast doubt on her guilt by suggesting a cover-up by Guy Hand. The jury was tasked with determining not only who had killed James, but why, and whether or not the crime had been premeditated. After days of deliberation, the jury finally reached a verdict. The room fell silent as the four persons stood to announce the decision. The tension was palpable. The fate of a young woman and the memory of a young man hung in the balance. "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of second-degree murder," the foreperson declared. The words reverberated through the courtroom, filling the air with a heavy weight of finality. Melanie's face remained unchanged as she stood motionless in the dock. There was no visible reaction, no sign of relief or shock. She had been convicted, and now she would have to face the consequences of her actions. The verdict was a bitter victory for the prosecution. Though Melanie had been convicted, they couldn't help but feel that there were still too many unanswered questions surrounding the case. They had won, but the mystery of who had really killed James Barry and why remained unsolved in many ways. The question of whether Guy Hand had been involved in any way lingered in the minds of those who followed the trial closely. As for Melanie, her fate was sealed. In the sentencing phase, the defense presented evidence of Melanie's troubled past, including allegations of abuse by her mother. They argued that this history of trauma had played a role in shaping Melanie's mental state and contributed to her actions that night. But the prosecution countered that such circumstances didn't excuse the brutal murder of James Barry. Judge Glenn Kelly considered all the factors before passing his sentence. The courtroom held its breath as he delivered his decision. Melanie M., you are hereby sentenced to 50 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 25 years. May you reflect on the consequences of your actions for the rest of your life. The sentence was harsh, but many felt it was deserved. The Barry family, devastated by the loss of James, finally had some sense of closure. They had waited so long for justice, and though it would never bring their son back. The verdict gave them a small measure of peace. James's mother, Nicola, spoke briefly after the sentencing, her voice breaking with emotion. He was a good soul. He didn't have a mean bone in his body, she said, fighting back tears. He loved life. He loved his family. He loved his friends. And now, he's gone because of one moment, one mistake. For Melanie, her life would never be the same. She was sent to prison, where she would spend decades reflecting on the consequences of her actions. But in a way, the sentence was the end of a tragic chapter, not just for her, but for everyone involved. As the years passed, James's family held on to his memory, remembering the vibrant young man he had been, the kind of son, brother, and friend who would have had a bright future ahead of him. For them, there would always be the question of what could have been. For Melanie, there would always be the weight of what she had done. In the end, the truth was clear, but the loss of James Barry would never be erased. The tragic events of that night in Loxahatchee would haunt everyone involved for the rest of their lives. Thank you for watching today's story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another chilling story. Special thanks to our Sherlock Holmes members for their continued support. See you in the next one.